He was 19 years old when he signed the paper. He was a kid from Houston, Texas, from a neighborhood that had produced exactly one NBA player in its entire history, and that player was him. And the man sitting across the table with the contract and the warm smile told him, "I am going to protect you. I am going to build you a legacy. Every single thing I do from this moment forward is for you." He signed. And J.C. Williams got to work, not building Demetrius Woods a legacy, taking it dollar by dollar, contract by contract, endorsement by endorsement, over 11 years, across what would become one of the most productive careers of his generation. $20 million that belonged entirely to Demetrius Woods moved silently and deliberately into the accounts of the man he had trusted with everything. Welcome to Corporate Chaos Scandals, the place for the most shocking and unbelievable workplace confession stories. From office drama to hidden secrets, nothing's off limits. Before we get into this, make sure you subscribe and like, because we bring you stories like this every week. His name is Demetrius Woods. 30 years old at the time this story reaches its conclusion. Born and raised in Houston, Texas, the youngest of 3 children in a family that knew the specific arithmetic of a life without margin. His father drove delivery routes across the city 6 days a week. His mother worked weekday mornings at a school cafeteria and weekend evenings at a hospital reception desk. 2 jobs every week, the kind of scheduling that leaves almost no white space in a life. They were not people who complained about this. They were people who understood that the world required more from them than it required from others, and that preparation and discipline were not optional qualities but survival requirements. And they passed this understanding to their children with the same directness they applied to everything else. Demetrius had been playing basketball since he was 7 years old. The game arrived in his life the way certain things arrive in certain people's lives. Not gradually, not as something he was introduced to and had to warm up to, but as an immediate and total recognition. This was the thing. This was the language. This was where the gap between what he was and what the world could see was the smallest. By 12, the youth league coaches were using words like rare. By 15, the high school program was drawing scouts to regular season games in a gym that had never merited that kind of attention. Parents who came to watch their own children play noticed the atmosphere shift when Demetrius had the ball. The gym got quieter and more attentive in the specific way a room gets when it is watching someone do something that cannot be fully explained. By 17, he was in the national top 10. By 18, he had scholarship offers from 14 universities, and a name that people in the basketball world were saying the way they say the names of people who are going to matter. He chose a university for 1 year. His one college season produced numbers that were not freshman numbers. He moved in ways that looked effortless and were not effortless, were the product of 10,000 hours of the specific grinding, repetitive work that separates talented from exceptional. He left after 1 season and entered the NBA draft. He was selected 4th overall by the Houston Metro Stars. He was 19 years old, from Houston, Texas, drafted 4th overall by the Houston Metro Stars. The city did not react to this as an ordinary sports news event. It reacted the way cities react when something feels like it was meant to happen, like a piece of the place had found its way home. The press conference was on a Tuesday. His mother sat in the front row. She was wearing a dress she had bought the previous Saturday. When Demetrius held up the Stars jersey for the cameras, she put her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she put her hands in her lap and sat very straight and smiled in the way she smiled when she was feeling something she intended to contain. He needed an agent. J.C. Williams did not wait for Demetrius to come looking. J.C. Williams had been watching Demetrius since his junior year of high school, not casually, systematically. He had attended 4 games in the season before the college year. He had introduced himself at one of them to Demetrius's coach with the easy confidence of a man who knew that the introduction was a seed rather than a transaction, that the coach would remember his name and at some point say it in Demetrius's presence, and that this was the beginning of a relationship that he intended to be standing at the ready when the moment to formalize it arrived. J.C. Williams was 43 years old when he signed Demetrius. He had been a sports agent for 16 years. He was not the most prominent name in basketball representation. He was not the agent whose name came up first at the top end of the market. He operated in a space slightly below that tier with a client list of 11 athletes across 3 sports, with a reputation that was professionally solid and personally warm, and that communicated to anyone doing the research before meeting him. The man who was serious about his clients without the egotism of the big names. He was very good at one thing that the biggest names in the business were, often not, making a young man from a working class background feel genuinely seen. He understood the specific emotional landscape of a player like Demetrius, the family that had sacrificed, the neighborhood that was watching, the sudden weight of a platform and an income that neither the player nor anyone around him had a framework for navigating. He had grown up in circumstances he described as similar, which was biographically true. He had not told Demetrius because there was no reason to tell him what that similarity had produced in him. Not solidarity, the precise and detailed understanding of what a young man in this position needed to believe about who was standing beside him. The representation agreement was within the standard range, 5% of sports contracts negotiated on Demetrius's behalf. 3% of commercial endorsement agreements. The meeting was at a hotel conference room. Demetrius, his parents, J.C. His parents asked questions. J.C. answered every one of them warmly and completely, and in a way that made his parents feel that the questions were good questions and that they were smart to have asked them. He had answered these questions before. He knew how to answer them. There was one additional document, a power of attorney, financial scope, framed as limited to player contract and endorsement negotiations, and the associated financial administration required to manage the income of a professional athlete. J.C. said it was standard. He used that word specifically, standard. He explained what it meant in terms that were accurate in their individual elements. This is what a power of attorney is. This is what financial scope means. This is why agents typically require it. And that word in their combination and in the things they did not say, misleading about the full practical authority the document would give him. Demetrius's parents were not attorneys. Demetrius was 19 years old and had spent the preceding decade thinking about one thing. He signed. J.C. Williams shook hands with the family. He told them how excited he was about the road ahead. He told Demetrius he was going to protect him. He folded the power of attorney into his briefcase. He went to work. Demetrius's rookie contract with the Houston Metro Stars was $18 million over 4 years. He was one of the 12 best players in the league by the end of his second season. By his 4th season, he had made 2 All-Star appearances, won a conference championship, and developed a quality of leadership and decision-making in critical moments that the Stars organization had built their identity around. He was not the kind of player who dominated a statistics sheet in ways that were easy to present to a casual fan. He was the kind of player whose teams won, whose presence in a closing minute changed the geometry of what was possible. That is the rarest kind, and it is the kind that the most serious people in the sport understood with a clarity that was reflected in what they were prepared to pay. His second contract was $68 million over 5 years. When the number was announced, his mother called. Her voice had the quality of a woman who had worked 2 jobs for 20 years, now trying to hold a number in the context of the life she had lived. He said, "We're good, Mama. We're really good now." She said she knew. She said she knew a long time ago. J.C. Williams had negotiated the second contract correctly. He was too experienced and too smart to undervalue the asset at the contract level. That was not where the extraction happened, and doing it there would have been visible to anyone. The work he was doing was invisible by design. It operated in the financial administration layer that the power of attorney gave him complete and unchallenged authority over. Management fees charged at rates beyond the contracted commission, processed through subsidiary entities that JSC controlled, whose names appeared on statements in a form that was descriptive enough to seem legitimate and vague enough to resist easy interrogation. Investment placements. Demetrius had been told his money was being built into a diversified portfolio managed by a specialist wealth firm. routed through funds whose internal fee arrangements benefited JC personally through relationships with the fund operators that Demetrius had no visibility into and had no reason to look for. Endorsement agreements in which the gross figure reported to Demetrius reflected deductions for production costs and representation overheads that were not being spent on their stated purposes, but were moving into accounts JC controlled. Each entry was calibrated, not so large as to be obviously wrong if Demetrius glanced at a statement, not so small as to be individually insignificant. Jerry Racy had spent 16 years understanding the threshold. He knew what a professional athlete looked at and what he didn't. He knew what questions got asked and what questions never occurred to someone who had signed his first professional contract at 19 and spent the decade before it thinking about nothing except basketball. Demetrius received monthly statements that JC prepared. The balances were significant. He was wealthy. He was building something. The underlying structure of it, the specific fees, the investment routing, the endorsement net figures, was not a language he had ever been given the tools to read from first principles, which was a fact JC had identified before he sat down at the hotel conference room table 11 years before. Over 11 years, 2 playing contracts, 17 major endorsement deals, the full commercial landscape of one of the most recognizable athletes in the state of Texas. J.C. Williams extracted $20 million from Demetrius Wood's financial life. The player who told a national sports publication in year 6 that J.C. Williams was the man who protected him when the world was trying to take from him had been speaking in perfect good faith about the man who was doing the taking. The conversation that changed everything happened in a locker room. It could only have happened the way it happened in a professional locker room, in the particular atmosphere of people who have spent years together in high-pressure environments, whose conversations happen at a depth that public-facing relationships rarely reach. Demetrius was in his 9th season, 30 years old, beginning to think about what the next chapter looked like beyond the playing years. He was in conversation with Marcus Ellison, a veteran guard, 13 years in the league, who had the specific and hard-won quality of someone who had made expensive financial mistakes early and had learned from them so thoroughly that they had become the thing he was most useful to other people about. Marcus talked about how he managed his money, the oversight he maintained, the specific questions he asked his people every month, the specific documents he asked to see, the way he had restructured his entire financial management after discovering, in year 4 of his career, that the person managing his assets had been less rigorous than Marcus had been assuming. At some point in the conversation, he made a passing reference to agent fee structures, about the difference between what was standard and what should raise questions. Demetrius said, "What do you mean?" Marcus looked at him. He said, "What does your full fee schedule look like? Not the commission rates, the full picture, management fees, administration charges, investment placement fees, everything," Demetrius said. "The 5% from contracts and 3% from endorsements," Marcus said. "And what else?" Demetrius said. "That's the agreement." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at Demetrius the way someone looks at a person who has just said something that tells you more than the words themselves convey. He said, "When did you last actually look at your statements? Not the totals, the line items." Demetrius was quiet, and Marcus said, "Look at the statements, every line. And if something doesn't make sense, you call someone who isn't connected to JC and you ask them what it means." He said it simply, not dramatically, not as an accusation, as advice from someone who had learned the same lesson at a different cost. Demetrius drove home that evening and sat at the kitchen table with 2 years of statements in front of him. He looked at them for a long time. He did not have the financial vocabulary to identify what was wrong with precision, but he had spent 9 years learning to read situations, to see the thing underneath the thing, and what he was looking at did not feel right. He called his accountant the following morning. Robert Haynes had handled Demetrius's tax filings for 10 years. He had access to the year-end documents, not to the underlying financial administration. He had never raised a concern. Demetrius asked a question he had never asked before. He said, I need you to tell me the total of every fee paid to any entity connected to J.C. Williams or Williams Sports Management across our entire relationship. Robert needed 2 days. When he called back, he said the figure he had compiled from available records was $14 million. He said he believed it was incomplete. The full picture would require documentation held by Williams Sports Management that Demetrius would need to formally request. Demetrius engaged Denise Carr within the week, a sports law attorney, 38 years old, 5 years in the field with 3 prior athlete financial exploitation cases. She knew what she was likely to find before she requested the first document. She had seen the architecture before. She submitted the mandatory disclosure request to Williams Sports Management under the terms of the representation agreement. JC's office complied. Denise reviewed everything for 10 days. Then she called Demetrius. She said, "I need you to come in. Bring whoever you trust most." He brought his mother. Denise and forensic accountant Dr. Leon Foster walked them through the full reconstruction across 6 weeks. The total was not $14 million, it was $20 million. The additional 6 was embedded in investment fee structures, in doubled expense charges, and in a set of entity relationships constructed specifically to create enough distance between the extraction and its source to survive surface scrutiny. Demetrius's mother held his hand across the conference table from the first page of the presentation to the last. When they finished, she said, "How many years have we known this man?" Denise said, 11 years, Mrs. Woods. His mother looked at the documents on the table. She sat very still, the way she sat very still when she was containing something. Then she said, "My son told a magazine that J.C. Williams protected him when the world was trying to take from him." She paused and she said, "The world wasn't trying to take from him. J.C. was the world. The civil lawsuit was filed for $35 million. The criminal referral went simultaneously. J.C. Williams was arrested 8 months after the first document request. The defense argued that the fees were legitimately structured within the power of attorney's scope, that Demetrius had been kept informed at every stage, and that the financial arrangements reflected standard industry practice. The forensic reconstruction dismantled each element of this case over 3 weeks. The power of attorney, the document presented to a 19-year-old in a hotel conference room as standard, was the central exhibit. The judge, in sentencing remarks that were covered by every major sports publication in the country, described it as the most deliberately constructed instrument of exploitation she had encountered in a financial crime proceeding. J.C. Williams was convicted on 11 counts. He received 11 years. He was ordered to pay $20 million in restitution. His agent license was permanently revoked. The civil case settled at a figure whose specific terms were confidential, but that Demetrius's attorney confirmed publicly was substantial. Demetrius played 2 more seasons after the proceedings concluded. His last season was in Houston. The city celebrated it with the specific warmth of people who knew the whole story. Not just the 4th pick and the championships and the closing minute decisions, but the 11 years and the $20 million and the choice he had made to go after what was his rather than carry the weight of it quietly. He retired at 32. He established a foundation the following year. It works with young athletes entering professional sports on financial literacy and representation awareness. The educational materials it produces focus specifically on 3 things: what a power of attorney document means in practice, what standard actually means when someone uses it to describe a contract, and the importance of independent legal advice before signing anything at the beginning of the most financially consequential period of your life. He named the foundation Eyes Open. His mother is on the board. She attends every event. She sits in the front row. J.C. Williams has not been in contact since the conviction. He is serving his sentence. He had nothing to say that 11 years didn't say for him. That is the story of Demetrius Woods and J.C. Williams. The signature at 19 years old, the $20 million, the locker room conversation with an old teammate that started the whole thing unraveling. Drop a comment below. Who failed Demetrius in this story? J.C., obviously, but also the system that presents a 19-year-old kid with no financial background and no independent counsel in the room, with a power of attorney document and calls it standard. Tell me where you land, and share this one widely. Because right now there are young athletes being handed documents that look exactly like the one Demetrius signed, by men who sound exactly like J.C. Williams sounded in that hotel conference room. They deserve to know what those words can do in the wrong hands before they pick up the pen. And if you are not subscribed to Corporate Chaos Scandals, hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video. We are here every single week. I'll see you in the next one.